Hello and welcome. My name is Tara Hembry and I'm the COC Project Coordinator at Maine Housing. Today I'm going to talk to you about a new iteration of the Emergency Housing Voucher Assessment Tool that the Coordinated Entry Committee has revised to provide better consistency for you who are administering the tool and to meet some HUD requirements. Let's do a little bit of background. So as most of you know, the Emergency Housing Voucher Program is available through the American Rescue Plan Act, and HUD is providing 70,000 housing choice vouchers to local public housing authorities to assist individuals who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, or who are recently homeless or have a high risk of housing instability. In Maine, we received 180 vouchers for emergency housing across the state, and HUD requires that the vouchers are administered through the continuum of care in its coordinated entry system. In Maine, we wanted to further define the population that would be eligible for the housing vouchers. And so the priority populations that are targeted for the resource are people who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. And you'll see here on the screen that we just shortcutted that with DV, but please understand that that's the HUD definition, the larger, to encompass all of those populations. And the second population that we're prioritizing for these emergency housing vouchers are literally homeless households. So those in emergency shelters, in the hotels paid by third parties, unsheltered, transitional, or in transitional housing. This is a wide range for this literally homeless category. And so within this range, we are going to prioritize, and that's going to start with the individuals who are literally homeless that are currently staying in the FEMA or time-limited hotel settings. We want those to be flagged to be prioritized first to the housing authorities. And then the remainder of referrals are going to be prioritized based on their length of time homeless or lost. And that's going to be used, and all that information that's going to be captured on this new emergency voucher assessment tool will be something that we'll use at Maine Housing as the coordinated entry operator. This isn't anything that you guys have to worry about, but I just wanted you to be aware of what the process is going to look like. So as I mentioned, HUD has required that the emergency housing vouchers be part of the continuum of care and coordinated entry. And we don't have a coordinated entry system fleshed out yet in the state of Maine, but we look at these emergency housing vouchers as an opportunity to kind of roll out a small scale version of coordinated entry. Coordinated entry provides consistency and equitable resources across the board so that all individuals are referred the same way to a resource. So that means that each household, the process will include determining the household is in one of the priority populations, completing the EHV Assessment Tool, completing the EHV Referral Packet, and then as a referring provider, assisting the household with the application process with the housing authorities. So that's what you guys will be doing as the navigators, is helping individuals with their application process, and also providing housing search assistance through the lease-up process. And those last two bullets are part of the requirements to be able to administer these emergency housing vouchers. And that's why we're working with ESHAP providers and PATH and other street outreach providers who have the capacity to provide that sort of assistance for individuals. So when we look at the assessment process and how coordinated entry is going to work for EHVs, we have the access points, which is you and your agency that have the means to assess the household and offer the resources. The assessment tool itself, so you'll be able to look at this tool, gather the information that's necessary for eligibility and to help determine that prioritization status, and also give you a heads up to any barriers that the household may have for housing options. The housing options are then, the referrals are then prioritized based on open slots. And if the demand is high, as I mentioned, there is going to be that priority given to individuals in those FEMA funded COVID hotels. And then looking at people with the longest time homeless. And of course, there is that designated portion that has off the top a 15% portion to individuals who are fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. And then after that prioritization happens, then Maine Housing will take the information from the assessment forms that you're going to submit and a referral packet that we're going to ask that you submit and send the referrals to the housing authorities. And then the housing authorities will work with the household and the navigator to complete their application process and work with them and get them leased up. So the big thing here is that we have a newer version of our assessment tool. This is very similar to the assessment tool that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. To make things a little clearer as you're working on the assessment and to know which version you need to use, the formatting is slightly different. And also there's going to be some key points that are important. So I guess what I want to say mostly is that it's not a huge turn from the existing process that you've already looked at, the existing assessment. It's just better formatting. And also it pulls in some of the requirements that HUD mandates when we're working with coordinated entry. So I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint for just a moment and pull up that assessment document. All right, so here's the assessment document. And this first page is the piece that was really missing from our initial assessment form. So it's important that we explain some certain things to the individual that we're considering to refer and let them know how the assessment works, the purpose of the assessment to gaining information so that we can complete our pool of vouchers and make referrals, the fact that each household has a right to refuse the response and it's not going to impact their referral or the referral process. Also, we want to advise clients on their right to start and stop the assessment at any time. We also want to let them know that there's no right or wrong responses. It's just information that's helpful as we explore housing options, as you guys are exploring housing options as navigators. And then lastly, there's this piece in here that we want to let folks know that there is an option for them to file a non-discrimination complaint. And if that does come to light and you need that, just email me, Tara Hembry at mainhousing.org, and we'll send you a grievance form for the client to complete and fill out, and we'll work with that process to make sure that their concerns are addressed. All right. So that's the first page. As we move into the second page of the assessment, again, it's new formatting, but still capturing the essence of the information that was on the previous assessment form. We have a date, we have a client name, we have their service point, or for those with DV, working in DV agencies, their Empower ID. And here we're asking for their housing navigator or their case manager name, the individual that's going to work with them through this housing opportunity. So the person that can help them work with the housing authority, the person that can help them find the apartment and get them leased up. And so we asked for their name, the navigator phone, and email address, just to make that correspondence easier. The next piece talks about the current living situation. And again, these are those priority populations that we're using. So this just gives a heads up as to where they fall in that prioritization. And so you'll just check any, all that work. And then the next section is some basic information that as a committee we thought would be helpful as we're making decisions about this program and seeing what's happening with folks out in the field and in the communities. So we wanted to know what's happening as far as what agency you're working at, where you're living, and then if you have any vouchers that are available. And then the next page is something that was also part of the initial assessment process, which is a length of time homeless assessment. So as I mentioned, that's going to be part of the prioritization piece. And so we're asking that you complete this with your client, capturing their homeless nights in the last 3 years. And this is very similar to what you already do for other circumstances anyway. This continues on to the next page for you to total up what the nights are homeless. You can use HMIS to help capture those nights, as well as statements. And I think you guys are all familiar with the HUD requirements on how we capture that information. So one thing that we are going to ask that you do is that with this document, with this assessment form, that you also provide the documentation of the nights homeless. And here's a reminder of the HUD's preferred order for documentation. So third-party documentation, HMIS records, you as an intake worker and your observations, or certification from the individual seeking the assistance of their time homeless. And then the next couple of questions just get at some housing barriers that maybe that will be good to know as the navigator. The first one talks about some deal breakers, and we don't have to get specific. If they answer yes, that one or both of these barriers apply, then we would know that the household would not be a good referral because there's no way that they can qualify for the voucher. The second question just gets to some of the other housing barriers that may come into play. Some of these may be waived and may not have an impact on the client's eligibility for the emergency housing voucher. However, it would be helpful for you as the navigator to know what you may be running into and where you may need to grab some positive documentation to support this client being eligible for the voucher now. And then the last section of this new emergency housing voucher assessment tool is just some key points about the next steps. So we find that talking to constituents that sometimes there's questions about what are the wait times and what can we expect? Should I continue looking for housing if you're, right away? Who are we going to hear from with our process for the emergency housing vouchers? You'll be hearing from the housing authorities. They'll be reaching out to you, to the navigators, and to the households to try to get the process moving along quickly. And then lastly, just a reminder to folks that it's not an automatic approval for the emergency housing voucher if you're referred. It just means that based on our pool of referrals that you are eligible to get referred to the housing authority, but there's still going to be an eligibility application process with the housing authority. All right. And so that covers what the new assessment tool looks like. As you can see, it doesn't differ too much from the initial one. It just provides a little more clarity and meets those HUD requirements of things that we need to let the clients know about. All right. So I also talked about the fact that there's going to be a referral packet. So we've put together all the necessary documents in one PDF form. So not only will you have that Word document for the assessment tool, but also this PDF form that will go to the housing authority so that they can start the process. So we start in that packet, you'll see there's a checklist. There's an actual referral document that captures some basic eligibility and demographic information. There's also a homeless certification that will be part of that packet. This is required for the emergency housing voucher program, that your agency certify the homeless status of the individual. And then there's a couple releases of information. So we have two versions of this packet. For the domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking clientele, we will not ask you to sign the HMIS release of information because your data is not in HMIS. But the full non-DV packet will have not only a general release, but also an HMIS release of information so that we can keep track of the programs that you've been referred to within our homeless management information system. So I'm going to go back to another document for a second here and take a look at what that EHV referral packet looks like. So as I mentioned, here's the checklist. And it talks about what's part of this, and gives you my name and email address if you have any questions. And then we get into, there's 3 pages of the emergency housing voucher kind of pre-application. For those of you that have filled out any applications for the housing choice voucher programs, this looks very familiar to you. And this is what the housing authorities really wanted to use because it's a document that they're used to using. You'll see up in the right-hand corner, there's a piece where we ask you to check off FEMA hotel or fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking. And if you don't check it off, I will be looking for that information and I'll be flagging that as well. And then here you'll just see it's some basic demographic information. For those of you that are working with domestic violence victims, or you can, the home and physical address may be confidential, you can just write confidential in that and just provide a safe and secure mailing address for the household. It asks for their head of household, other people living in the unit. Again, this is a form that I'm sure you're all familiar of. This last page is the signature. So this is the signature of the referral applicant. And then the last page is, oops, went a little too far. The last page is just a supplement form as far as providing additional contacts for who may be able to help you with this voucher process. We suggest that that might be you as the navigator, that the client would put that in. If they also have another person or a family member that they want to have as a contact, they can do that as well. But again, we just want to make things as seamless and smooth as possible so that we can keep things moving in a positive direction. So again, this is part of the original application for Housing Choice Voucher. We've just removed some of the things that are no longer applicable. All right, so the homeless certification, I mentioned that this is a requirement from HUD. So this is the homeless certification. It's going to say, all right, what's the applicant's name, with or without dependent children. And then in each section, we're asking you to check a box whether or not they meet this criteria for homeless. And if so, what's the outreach program? And then each section is asking for an authorized agency representative signature. So please make sure that you sign and date this for your agency. All right, so that was the street outreach. Then we have folks in emergency shelter. We are asking here that you also give us a heads up about that being in a FEMA funded hotel, again, for that prioritization. We have the recently homeless option. Again, these were all part of that broader picture of eligible individuals defined by HUD. And then lastly, the victims or fleeing domestic violence. And again, that's the broader definition: dating violence, stalking, human trafficking, sexual assault, etc. After that homeless certification is the release forms. So we have a general release, which allows us to take your information and pass it along to the housing authorities. All right. And please read this over and make sure that you're comfortable signing that release. And then, as I mentioned, the homeless management information system. This is the HMIS release. Many of your clients have probably signed this already if they're part of the shelter. But again, we're asking them to sign this so that we can track their information in the system. If they're not willing to disclose or have their information disclosed to other agencies, that's completely fine. They can indicate that on the form and we'll make sure that their information is not visible to other agencies. Okay, and that sums up, that's a long release form, and that sums up the referral packet for the emergency housing voucher program. All right, so now I am going to go back to the PowerPoint. And so once you've completed the assessment, completed the referral packet, how do we get that information to Maine Housing so that we can start our prioritization and move it along to the housing authorities? We're going to be using ShareFile, and it's a really safe and secure way for organizations outside of each other to share information. This is the login page, what it will look like. And so in order to do that, most agencies have gotten in touch with me, but if you haven't, please send me an email and I will make sure that we get the folder set up and for you to access. And again, it's very specific about the permissions that are given. So we would like to have one liaison from each agency be in charge of uploading the files, and then also that person that we can contact if something isn't complete and we need to reference some documentation. So it's very simple. Once I get that person's name and email address, we put that into the system. They'll get a system generated email. And then when they'll set up a login, and when they log in, they'll be able to see this one little folder called EHV, and that's where you'll be able to upload those documents. All right. And so again, the documents that we're looking for are the Emergency Housing Voucher Assessment Tool and the Emergency Housing Voucher Referral Packet. So once you upload those documents, I get a system generated email automatically that says there's documents out there to go look at. I'll go out and take a look at those documents, make sure all the signatures are there, everything's been completed as it needs to be. If there is any missing information, then I'll be reaching out to the agency's liaison just to make sure we can follow up, and they'll connect with you as the navigator or the case manager that's working with the individual to make sure we get everything that we need. Once everything's received, it will be marked as received, and then we'll take a look at the number of referrals that are received during that time frame, which is going to be basically every day, because all the housing authorities really want to have those referrals as soon as possible. So we'll take a look at what we're receiving for referrals, how many vouchers are available, and then depending on how many resources are available, if we have to prioritize within that day, we will prioritize based on making sure that top portion goes to those victims of or fleeing domestic violence, those individuals that are residing in those FEMA funded or other time limited hotels, and then we'll be looking at length of time homeless. Right? And so as those referrals happen, based on the jurisdiction, then they'll be referred to housing authorities. The housing authorities involved are Portland, Caribou, Lewiston, Bangor, and Waterville. And then Maine Housing has the balance of the state. So Maine Housing will be working in the other communities that are not surrounded by those other 5. And so I thank you for your time. I know I kind of went over that quickly, but I think most of you are familiar with what we've been doing. You've started doing this, but we do want you to use the new form moving forward. So that's the form that's attached to this email where you found this link of the recording of this presentation. I just want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing. We certainly appreciate your flexibility. You know, we're rolling this out kind of as best we can. We're making changes that are needed. And we appreciate your giving your time as we build this system and move forward into the bigger picture eventually of coordinated entry. So I hope you're as excited as we are. I know the housing authorities are super excited. I know that that the communities are excited to hear that there's another resource available to them. And again, if you have any questions, be sure to reach out to us. You can reach out to myself at Maine Housing. My email is on here. You can also reach out to the Coordinated Entry Committee Tri-Chairs. That's Erin Kelly at Preble Street, Kate Easter from the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence, and Giff Jameson from Tedford Housing. Any one of us would be happy to answer your questions or at least connect you to the right person. So again, thank you for your time. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and stop the recording. Have a nice day.